Hello, everybody. This is Brent. I am going to do a quick lecture video over the types of joints. This is something that sometimes people don't quite get down real well at the beginning and they can struggle with it. So, stuff that I know might be a little bit tougher, I'm going to try and make videos over and have them ready for you. So, anyways, there are three main categories of joints. So a joint is just anywhere where bones meet together and connect together. So, the first category is known as synarthrosis joints or synarthroidal joints. Um, that just means that they don't move. Okay, they're not really designed to move. They don't move at all. The best example is in your skull. Okay, so here's an example of a skull. These are two different bones in your skull on each side that I'm touching here. They meet right here at the middle at this crazy looking squiggly line. Okay, that's one joint, right? But it doesn't move. It's not meant to move. And so I always remember that like sin's something you don't want to do. At least that's what I was taught. Um, and you don't want to move these joints, right? They're not really designed to move, and if they're moving, something bad's probably going on. If parts of your skull are floating around, it's not a good thing. So, synarthrosis joints, they don't move. Okay. The next kind of joint, and I'm going to grab our model here for this, is what's known as a amphiarthroidal joint, which means it kind of moves, but it also kind of doesn't. The best example of this, and let me turn this just a little bit more, is your pubic symphysis. Okay, don't worry about this particular joint too much yet. You'll learn it later. But it's a joint where, look, we've got a bone here and a bone here that form your pelvis. They come together, they meet right here in the middle. This is the joint here. There's a little piece of cartilage in here. Now, it doesn't move much, but it does move some, just a little bit. It's not really designed to move a whole lot, but it will allow a little bit of spreading, a little bit of rotation, and things like that. It does, like if a woman's getting ready to give birth, the pelvis will spread out to allow the child to pass through the birth canal. Um, so, anyways, a joint that comes together and moves, but not a lot, just a little bit of movement, is an amphiarthroidal or amphiarthrosis joint. Okay, and then um, the final category of joints are joints that move, and most of our joints are joints that move. The joints of the fingers, where the bones in your fingers meet, the bones in your wrist meet, the bones in your elbow meet. Okay, those are all diarthroidal. They move. They're dynamic, and that's how I remember that. They move. They're dynamic. They're active. So this is your hand. Okay, actually, this is your whole arm bone. Um, or a model of it at least. Okay, so all these joints in your arm are moving joints, right? They allow movement. Okay, so the elbow here, see, it moves. The wrist here, it moves. Those are diarthroidal joints. Now, there are different types of diarthroidal joints. Okay, um, so the most simple is what's called a non-axial plane joint. And what that means is it doesn't have an axis of movement. If you grew up playing with like action figures or even Barbies, there's an axis of movement. So the little pin that sticks through their body that allows you to lift their arm up like this, or the one in their wrist that sticks through, that's an axis that allows movement along that axis. Um, so this first type of joint has no axis. And the best example of that is your carpal bones in your wrist, which we'll learn later. But these two bones, all these bones right here, they just kind of touch each other and they don't like pin together, kind of like I talked about. They just slide back and forth. Okay. They are meant to move. They are meant to allow motion, but they don't do anything but just kind of rest up against each other and slide up against each other, kind of like tectonic plates a little bit. Um, so that's a plane joint. The next type of joint is what is called a uniaxial joint or a hinge joint. The best example of the hinge joint, as we already talked about it, is the elbow. Okay, so it opens. I hate this. Everything moves backwards on videos, and it takes me a while to figure it out. So it opens and closes like the hinge on a door. Okay, it is called uniaxial because there's only one direction of motion with this. Okay, it opens and closes or flexes and extends, to use our PT terminology, and that's it. So if I were to pretend that I had that pin like in an action figure, it would go through right like this, and it would close up and down, or flexed and extended just like this. That's a uniaxial hinge joint. The best example is your elbow, but there are other ones as well. Okay, your fingers are hinge joints as well. The little ones in from here down and up are all hinge joints. Okay. The next kind of joint is a pivot joint. I can't really show you this one very well, but at the very top, and you guys probably learned this, you have your C1 and your C2 vertebrae, which are an atlas and an axis, and they sit on top of each other, and one of them has a little piece that just sticks up like this, and the other cups around it, and it just rotates, right? Sits at the very base of your skull and allows you to shake your head no, right? Okay, it's a rotational joint. That's all it does. It just allows rotation. That's known as a pivot joint. It's also uniaxial, just goes one direction, okay, and it pivots around on each other. So that it's called atlantoaxial. Another example of that is actually in your arm, okay, how you can take your arm and turn it over like this, okay, that happens right here at the junction of your radius and your ulna. They rotate on each other, and it allows you to do this action, which is like turning the knob on a door. Biaxial, okay, biaxial means there's two different ways that joint can move. So your radius, okay, and your carpals are a good example of that. So this bone right here is your radius, okay, it runs down, and at the bottom of your arm it gets wider and it forms your wrist joint, okay, in combination with your carpal bones, so it's your radiocarpal joint. So this joint allows flexion and extension, okay, but it also allows you to take your wrist and do this, right? This is called radial, let me get to where you can see it, radial and ulnar deviation, okay? Radial deviation, ulnar deviation, okay? So your wrist has two actions that it can do. It can do flexion, extension, and those are basically the same action, right? And then this side-to-side motion, which is radial and ulnar deviation, okay? And that's an ellipsoid joint. It's one end is rounded, like here at the carpals, and the other end kind of flexes in and makes like a little bit of cave, okay? Ellipsoid. The next type of joint that we're going to look at real quick is called a condyloid joint. It is also biaxial. Let me see if I can make this work. So your knee, way down here, is a condyloid joint. It's got what are known as two condyles, and then the other side, which is your tibia, okay? This is your femur, this is your tibia. These are condyles. They fit together, and it allows flexion and extension. And whether you know it or not, your knee actually rotates a little bit too. And that's the second degree of motion there. That's why it's biaxial. So it has a little bit of pivot, like we talked about, and also hinge. So it's a hinge joint with just a little bit of pivot in there as well. It's condyloid because it's got these two round parts to it that are called condyles that fit into this curved surface down here, your tibial plateau. Okay. All right. So going to the next type of joint. The next biaxial type of joint is a saddle joint. Okay. Saddle joint is exactly like it sounds. It looks like a saddle. Okay. So the best example of that is in your thumb. Okay, so this carpal bone right here is known as your trapezium. Okay, touches your thumb, rhymes with thumb, trapezium. But if you can kind of look, you can kind of see how the trapezium looks a little bit like a saddle, right? You can kind of see it there. And then this part wraps around it like the legs of a rider sitting in that saddle. So this is called your it's carpal metacarpal. Okay, so this is the metacarpal right here, and this is your carpal. Okay, so the first carpal metacarpal joint is a hinge joint. You also have another saddle joint. I apologize. You also have another one right here in your chest where your clavicle and your sternum meet. They kind of lock in together like that, like a rider sitting in a saddle. And then the final type of joint is what's known as a ball and socket joint. So we're going to borrow our guy here again. So your hip is a really good example of a ball and socket joint. Your shoulder is one as well, but you have this big ball at the end of your femur here, okay? And it slides into this hole in your pelvis, okay? It's known as your acetabular fossa, which you'll learn that later too. Don't worry about that right now. But it just means a ball and socket just means there's a ball and a socket that it goes into. And ball and socket joints are known as triaxial joints, which means they allow at least 3 different types of movement and really more than that. So your hip can flex and extend, go out behind you, come out in front of you. It can also go out and in, which is abduction away from your body, adduction, adduction towards your body. And it can also turn, it can rotate, it can go inwardly and outwardly. You can shake your whole leg and turn it in and walk kind of pigeon-toed, or you can take your whole hip and turn it out and walk kind of duck-footed, right? So your hip allows all different ranges of motion and mixes of all those in between. So it's known as a triaxial ball and socket joint. Now, all of these ones that allow movement are diarthrodial joints, okay? So hopefully that helps clarify just a little bit about what these different types of joints are. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.